It really is an enormous pleasure for me to be here, and Sonal's very kindly asked me just to say a few short words in relation to a foreigner's view on India. I happen to be a lawyer, but much more importantly, I like to be thought of as a friend of India, and that's how I see myself, I have to say. I hope all of you noticed the irony today of Lord Karan Bilamoria being here, being the head and boss of Cobra Beer, whilst the head and boss of Kingfisher is in the UK. So I hope you noticed that point. One of the biggest changes that I've seen in the 12 years that I've been focused on India has been in the confidence, the deep confidence that I've seen in the students and undergraduates in particular coming out of the Indian universities. And Karen mentioned that Indian universities, Indian centres of higher education don't feature in the top echelons, but what I can tell you from years and years of experience of interviewing and recruiting from Indian universities, that the top people coming out of the law schools in India, and I'm sure it's true of the other leading engineering, medical, management schools of India, are every bit as good as those people coming out of Oxford and Cambridge and Sydney and Harvard and Yale and Melbourne. And I can tell you that I have interviewed thousands of students from around the world for entry to our law firm, and the cleverest person I have ever interviewed came from the National Law School in Bangalore, an absolutely outstanding individual. I've been struck by many of the sessions over the course of the last day and a half, but I was particularly struck by the session by Amitabh Kant, and I think India is very fortunate to have him as one of its leaders. And he has an ability to synthesize very complicated issues in a very complicated country into very clear points. And what I loved was the 4 points that he made. One was on simplifying the way in which things are done in India. India is a complicated country. He talked about competition between states. He talked about the enormous opportunities that come through using technology to leapfrog previous technologies, so the use of mobile financial arrangements, for example. And he also talked about looking east, not west, in relation to smart cities. So to have him with that vision, I think is phenomenal. But unquestionably, and you don't need me to tell you this, there is a mountain to climb. I'm completely optimistic that India can climb that mountain. And I'm going to make a slightly different point now, and Karen will just need to forgive me. He said some very nice things about the UK, but I'm just going to remind myself of some of the damage, frankly, that the British did during the time that we were in India. And I think that part of the reason that there is such a mountain to climb in India is because of the British, frankly. And I don't know if any of you have read the polemic by Shashi Tharoor called Inglorious Empire. And that, for me, was a reminder of some pretty damaging things that the British did. So, despite the British, and for which I apologize, I believe that India is quite capable of achieving greatness. So climbing the mountain is an adventure, and adventures are fun. So I hope that all of you, and I include myself in this, I hope all of us can enjoy that journey. One of my favorite social historians is a man called Professor Ramachandra Guha. And he has written a number of recent histories on India. And one of his views, and the view that I have to say I really like, is that India, of all the countries in the world, is the most interesting country. And I think during the course of this conference, and I know that Sudhir has a lot of responsibility for the content of this conference. I think we've seen some wonderful examples of how interesting India is. Number one, you have a singing minister with the most beautiful voice, and perhaps Theresa May could do rather better in the Brexit discussions, or non-Brexit discussions, depending on Karen's view, if perhaps she sang as part of those discussions. You have a TV mogul, a man named Arnab, who has the confidence that he will be bigger and better than the BBC and CNN, perhaps the two combined, and that's wonderful. And then, perhaps most striking of all, you have a yoga guru who is also a phenomenally successful business person. So please, please, as part of the climbing of the mountain, promise me this, that you will not lose what it is to be Indian, that you will continue to be fantastically interesting. I very strongly believe that all of us right across the world are ultimately brothers and sisters. I certainly regard myself as a brother and sister with people around the world. But what I would say is that my brothers and sisters in India are more interesting than most. Thank you very much.